I'm sure that most of you have heard about the recent Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 drama by now, that has everyone choosing opposing hills to die on, but what has really happened here exactly? To understand the current drama, let's go back to 2018 when Kingdom Come Deliverance 1 came out. Many people were accusing the studio back then of being intolerant, sexist, and even racist for choosing to not include people of color and LGBTQ minorities in their game. And Daniel Vavra, the co-founder, writer, director, and designer of the studio, came out to defend said decisions by claiming that they were just going for historical accuracy, and that is why things like people of color did not exist in the game.
Look how easy it is to be racist. Let's continue.
Of course, most gamers rallied around him in support, especially since back in 2018, the DEI nonsense was beginning to really pick up speed in games as well. I know many people, myself included, who normally do not play, nor enjoy, for that matter, first-person shooter games, but decided to still support this small studio that seemed to be in tune with what the majority of gamers really wanted out of games, and decided to stand with them and go against the trend of trying to push far-left propaganda in every single medium of entertainment. So I eventually played and was really surprised when I really enjoyed Kingdom Come Deliverance 1 back then, and was very excited about the second installment, as despite it being an FPS, a game I don't usually enjoy, the amount of fun that I had with it genuinely took me by surprise. At the time, the studio was trying to defend their decision to make the protagonist a straight white male at every turn. And people still defended them because, yeah, this was an RPG and usually the player is given more freedom over the protagonist's looks and personality. But in the case of this RPG, we would still play a role, only this time we would play a character that was a bit more set in his ways, looks, and personality. Fast forward to 2019, when Embracer Group acquires Warhorse Studio. Of course, with said acquisition by a company that openly embraces DEI and is all for fulfilling ESG criteria for investor money, the inclusion of more liberal ideas, characters, and concepts was inevitable. But let me be clear here, we might not like that, but that is every studio's prerogative, just like it is every consumer's prerogative to opt out of buying a game they don't want to support for any given reason. But I do believe in creative liberties, and if we are really being honest here, it is also perfectly natural for studios to go with whatever they think is more profitable for them. However, the biggest problem for me here are not the changes themselves, as they seem to be optional, but the way the studio decided to go about announcing said changes, and then the way they reacted to some of the backlash to said changes. To be perfectly honest, I thought that some of the backlash was a bit too much. The way some people chose to express their criticism was a bit too childish for me, and at times, some of the critiques themselves felt really nonsensical. For example, people complaining about a black person being in the game was a bit over the top for me. I get it that the likelihood of a black person being in Bohemia at the time is unlikely, however that person was at least made to be a merchant in this game, and while unlikely, it is at least more plausible and logical for a black merchant to have been passing by the area in his travels, for example. I feel like they wanted to incorporate a more diverse character, and they did so in a more organic and natural way that didn't feel like token inclusivity, in my opinion. And at the end of the day, it is just a black person, so I did not see what the big deal was really all about. But let me get back to the real problem for me in this entire drama, because no matter how childish some of the criticism by the fans was, I would never have expected the studios, and mainly Mr. Vavra's responses to said criticism, being at times equally childish but also completely unprofessional and a bit gaslighty as well. In my humble opinion, both Mr. Vavra and the studio as a whole should have just said, yes, we made some changes, we totally stand by them, but we know said changes might upset some of you, so we made everything that is new optional, and thus I hope you still decide to give this game a chance nonetheless, and just call it a day. Instead, Mr. Vavra started mocking and making fun of the people that once stood by him. I do not blame him entirely, however, because as we've already established, some of the criticism was equally harsh and illogical at times, and that can be extremely irritating and annoying to deal with. However, he is the one who is supposed to be representing a studio that is trying to sell us a game. But here is where I believe everything went wrong for people that are now so passionately against Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Because I feel like these same people are holding Vavra and the studio to something that they falsely believed that they were claiming back in 2018. And I think that they are also forgetting that this is a studio, and they want to make money like any other business would. As with every other studio, company, corporation, what have you, they too were going with what would make them more money. And no one can blame a for-profit organization for that, much less a small studio that is only now beginning to make games. So they went with what the majority of the player base was desperate for back then, which was a game free of propaganda, but then they became more successful, which led to their acquisition by Embracer, which led to them pulling in 180, because obviously they now have to fulfill certain criteria set by the ones in charge. When Vavra was accused of selling out to BlackRock, however, he brought the receipts and said that Embracer is not owned by BlackRock, which is factually true by the way, but Vanguard is on that list, which is like me saying, of course I didn't add anything spicy to your food. Look at the ingredients on the counter. Do you see any chilies? But then you can see like a mountain of jalapenos on there. So it's basically the same thing but in different form, because Vanguard and BlackRock are all part of the big three index fund managers called the Vanguard Group.
We are same, but different. But still same.
And they did not force anything into the game, which granted might actually be the case. Maybe they did not force them to embrace their attitude towards DEI and ESG. However, it also stands to reason that a small studio would do so nonetheless to appease the ones that have or can bring in more money, or the money that is just needed for the development of a game, or just for the studio itself.
Do you have any experience?
No, sir, I have no experience, but I'm a big fan of money. I like it. I use it. I have a little. I keep it in a jar on top of my refrigerator. I'd like to put more in that jar. That's where you come in.
They also claimed that the reason why Henry was exclusively straight in the first installment, but not in this one, was because of budget constraints and because Henry was not established as a character yet. Which, fair enough, again, that could have been the case if they hadn't been so adamant about Henry being straight, white, and a male back then. But writers do change their minds about characters they create, it is not unheard of, but the backlash to said character changes by the fans is not unheard of either, and should also be expected by the writers themselves when they choose to go ahead with such changes. As for the budget constraints, I wonder which initiative would be willing to give you more money if you chose to pander to them and incorporated more of the more progressive concepts they so passionately support. And that's the thing, really, this all would have been okay for them to admit to and do. This is their game after all. The problem here is that they were not transparent about any of this, and instead chose to backpedal and try to gaslight the audience. I myself will play the game at some point in time. This kind of gaslighty and mocking tactics have put me off of buying the game at full price, because I do not want to support such studio behaviors, tactics, and practices in general, but I might get the game during a sale or something. I cannot fully judge said changes, as I haven't played the game myself yet, but from what I've seen and heard from other people so far, while they noticed a somewhat different tone to the game still remains a fun and a very enjoyable experience, and at the end of the day, that is what games are really all about. And unlike other games that just include things for the sake of inclusion, there seems to be at least some thought behind these changes here, and many say that these changes may be new, but they have at least been organically incorporated into the story, which again may not be ideal or appealing to all of us, but at least it adds something to the story without being there just to serve as token inclusivity. Vavra has explicitly said before that the game has no propaganda in it because people from all walks of life and both sides of the political aisle were working on the game, so no matter what, to me this felt kind of inevitable because, of course, in today's political climate, both sides would want to include a piece of their ideals and beliefs into the game at some point in time. But even if we disregard the current political climate, it is inevitable in general for any artist not to inject some of their ideals and beliefs into their creations. So while I really appreciate them making these additions optional, again, the way they went about announcing these changes and reacting to the fans' criticism was my real issue here, because I'm getting really tired of studios mocking and gaslighting us all the time, and whether the studio is more right or left-leaning is irrelevant.
You mean you don't like me?
No, of course I like you. It's because I like you I don't want to be with you. It's a complicated emotion.
Because I cannot, in good faith, support practices like this, especially when the guy in charge proudly posts his game's Metacritic score, and then when more reviews come in and the game no longer has 90%, throws a small tantrum, pulls an 180, and proceeds to tell us how it's a shame most people look to Metacritic for game reviews and that we should all just trust OpenCritic instead because the game he made is still in the 90s there. I mean, because it has more reviews, options, and information. A guy that claims he's quote-unquote fed up of being dragged into the culture war, a war he previously seemed pretty okay with exploiting when it came to promoting the studio's first game. This is just laughable to me, because you cannot claim you have been dragged into a war that you willingly fought in when it was convenient for you. If you do not want to be dragged into a culture war, then stop using, abusing, and inciting it. In summary, I don't mind the changes, I mind the behavior. I am really tired of studios mocking and exploiting us whenever it is convenient for them. I understand they are a business that wants to make money, but that does not mean that I have to like the way they go about making said money.